I'm Giedrė Dzemydaite. I'm coming from Vilnius University, Lithuania. And also I'm now visiting University of Yale as postdoctoral researcher. And today I will move from big countries like USA and India to really small economies to check how they navigate crisis and how they transform during the crisis. Yeah, so let's move on. So when we talk about really small economies, actually they face very unique vulnerabilities to shocks due to their size and their dependence on external markets. And actually, when we check literature on the resilience, they all the time look more on the short-term resilience, how fast economies recover, how fast we come back to the previous levels. But actually, there is really not so many research about the capacity to change. And actually, when we have such time as new tariffs coming from USA, also military conflicts, sanctions, COVID-19, other, I don't know, environmental issues coming, we really should think about the economy's capacity to change and to keep the economy going and to keep economy in its good terms and so on. So it's really a question for long-term transformations of the economies that comes due to crisis and actually the capacity of them to change in terms of when something happens. Yeah, and it's really a question how to make those crises an opportunity to switch it to the opportunity for change and to be more adaptive and so to make economies more adaptive while some crisis hits. And in our research, we choose small countries that are Baltic states. There are actually three small countries in the Europe. How small they are? They are all under 3 million inhabitants, and their population in the last 3 decades shrinked. For example, Estonia has 1.35 million inhabitants, while Lithuania is in yellow the biggest, but they have only up to 3 million inhabitants. And all these countries have very interesting structural changes. They switched from planned economies. They were part of Soviet Union, and they started in 1991. They become independent, and they started to be market economies and develop trade relations and so on. And after 3 decades, all these economies in 2023, they were said to be advanced economies, developed advanced economies. So it's really huge achievement of their change because we started from almost with scratch. And they are absolutely open economies. Here is percent of GDP of the export of goods and services. So around 80% of their economies comes from the exports. So you can imagine that any shock in external markets can really affect these economies because on average, it's in the world, it's 30% of GDP comes to exports. And here we have 86%. Germany have 50%. We are also huge exporters, but just to compare, they are really, really open in the last decades. So the question is, how do crises impact these small economies and structural changes? Do they manage to diversify into new product groups when the crisis hits? And are those products that comes to their export portfolio, are they very related to their industrial structure, or are they unrelated? So we try to check what happens during crisis and what kind of diversification we see, and also These economies will come to be more complex economies during the last few decades. And we also want to see a bit more in depth. Is it related on unrelated diversification path? If they broke through, like they had some projects that were really unrelated, so and then how? And how during the crisis, does crisis affect, for example, more complex outcomes? Like we can imagine like COVID and some medical devices coming that could be less related. In this economy, we had 3 crisis periods in 98, then global financial crisis and COVID-19. And we tried to see if there are new export entries, export specialization entries due to those impulses. And here is like complexity indexes. So just to see, to show that they're going up, and we also want to see if it's related or unrelated diversification. Okay, let's move on. So we have used export data, very detailed export data of 1,200 product classes. And we split that data. We had all products, and also we have products that are less complex and more complex. And we used a logic model to see to measure probability of new export specialization entries. So actually we measured when new export specializations comes to their export portfolio and what are the factors behind that and what factors could affect higher probability of new export specialization entries. Yeah, and we checked like relatedness, how those new export specializations are related to previous industry structure, how prices affect, and other indicators like R&D and service sectors. Here's how a dependent variable, it looks like if visualized. Here you can imagine all product rules on 1,200, and here is year coverage, and green lines are specializations. If the line is from here to here, like long one, it means that country kept some export specializations for all the years. But if some new line comes in some years, that means it's an entry of new export specializations. So what we measure, we actually measure is new coming of entries, and if the country keep that specialization for 2 years, that we involve in our model. Yeah. And here are complex ones. So in some complex ones, these countries have specialization through all the years, but also we have new specialization coming at different times, and we want to see why are they so. Also for the other countries. Here's our model. I don't give so much in depth, but I will present the results and main findings. We put as dependent variable entry, and independent variables was to see how related are those groups, how prices affect, and also other country and market indicators. And what result we got? I just see the most brief results. Here are relatedness density groups. The higher percentage, the more related product is to the portfolio, previous portfolio of that country. And what we have, growing elasticities. What does it mean? But actually, new export specializations that came to export portfolio were related to the previous. So the higher probability of new export specializations are in those products that are related to the export structure. But for the there's for more complex product groups, also equations. And for more complex groups, we saw both related and unrelated diversifications. That means that some complex products came to the export portfolio that was not related to previous. And it's a question, how? Crisis generally negatively affects less export specializations come during crisis. But when we check split into different relatedness group, we could see that that negative effect is for those really unrelated problems. But in these small economies, when crisis hits, we have more specializations coming that are quite related. The line is out here. It means more specializations comes in more related problem groups. Yeah, and we checked the impact of R&D. So R&D positively affects new specialization entries. And what is interesting that actually government R&D spending has higher elasticity than business. So government spending can affect new specializations more intensively. Also, it's very important to have knowledge-intensive services like engineering, IT, scientific research services that are also coming from, for example, foreign direct investments, because they positively affect new specialization entries also in produced products. And also we showed that for such small countries, there's really market effects. If the market is huge of that product category, it's really a challenge to enter. So these small economies, they have a higher probability of entering into more niche, smaller markets due to competition issues. Yeah. So the main conclusions: crisis reshape, not halt, diversification, and we have very more related paths that comes from the internal structure. Generally related diversification is the path of economic development, but we have unrelated products coming, and it's much more interesting case how to break through that path dependency. Public R&D spending and services are quite important, and also we saw market constraints also could shape the diversification paths. So thank you for listening.